Hi, good afternoon. Good morning to all of you that have logged in. My name is Sudha David-Wilp, and on behalf of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, I'd like to welcome you to our monthly Transatlantic Tuesday. Transatlantic Tuesdays is a monthly series run out of the Berlin office where we discuss the most important issues with leaders on both sides of the Atlantic and experts on both sides of the Atlantic regarding pertinent issues that are important to Europe and the United States. And I'd like to also thank our Business Alliance for making this series possible. Today, we're going to be discussing Germany's Zeitenwende, and we're going to look at defense policy. Last month, we took a look at energy policy, and now we're going to look at sort of the revolution or semi-revolution, some may argue otherwise, following Chancellor Scholz's Zeitenwende speech, and whether the 100 billion euro investment in the Bundeswehr will in fact lead to significant change. So I'm going to start with a brief moderated conversation for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The questions will automatically queue up, and I will get to them shortly. And we've got some great speakers today. Dr. Claudia Major, who is head of international security, head of the International Security Research Division at SWT, the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, is with us today. And also my colleague from Warsaw, Michal Baranowski. He's a senior fellow and director of GMF's Warsaw office. So let's get started. Claudia, I'd like to begin with you. You know, like I said, Chancellor Scholz announced a whopping 100 billion euro investment in the German military, which will quickly get Germany up to the 2% goal. And the wish list includes a lot of items such as F-35s, transport helicopters, and modernization of the Patriot air defense missile system. But given that the Bundeswehr has been woefully underfunded over the past couple of years, how long do you think it will take for the German armed forces to get up to speed, and what are sort of the top priority needs for Germany's military?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's always a pleasure to be with Michal on one debate, because it's always enriching and always excellent. So I'm really happy to be here. It's also very timely because the German parliament is currently debating the law that will put this special budget of 100 billion and it will pass or not pass, or however it will pass next week. So it's a really, really timely debate. I think what is important to remember is that the Chancellor, in his Zeitenwende speech on 27th of February, he announced two financial decisions which are interlinked. He promised a 100 billion special budget to be anchored in the Constitution in order to fund long-term procurement projects. So to have financial security for all the things that take a lot of time and are really expensive, like the F-35 or the Future Combat Air System with France. He also announced that Germany will finally spend 2% of its economic power on defense. That is the 2% Germany promised to NATO in 2014. And if we are very honest, which were not even in the books. So the financial planning of Germany didn't foresee Germany reaching 2%. So announcing 2% was a real milestone. Also, if you are aware of what it would mean in terms of money, Germany is now spending roughly 50 billion. If Germany were to spend 2% this year or next year, we would move to 75 billion, which would turn Germany into the biggest defense spender in Europe. Britain is spending something roughly 56 billion, France roughly 41 billion, both spend 2%. So Germany would be far ahead if it would spend this money. How the two are interlinked is currently debated. Probably all the money, all these things you buy from the special budget, from the 100 billion special budget, will count to fulfill the 2%. So they are not separate, they are interlinked. But it's important to keep those two decisions in mind. You ask how long will it take? And I think it's important to remind ourselves that money were not the only problem in German defense. Money was lacking, but the defense budget has also increased since 2014 and the annexation of Crimea. 2013, we were standing at 33 billion, now we're at 50. So money was already coming in. But we had at least four problems. Money, not enough, and not in a kind of way you could plan with it, because we have just a 1-year planning horizon. So money was a problem. The procurement system is a problem. It's wrecked, doesn't function properly. It was a lack of political guidance. What do we need the armed forces for? Crisis management, stabilization, collective defense. So clear political guidance and, to be honest, clear political attention. Do we care about our armed forces and defense policy? And the fourth issue is the relationship between the industry, the armed forces, and the Ministry of Defense, which often led to special requirements, things taking longer, being more expensive, and not being what they really wanted to be. So we have 4 problems: money, procurement, political guidance, and the relationship. And now we solved the first one, money. If you don't solve the other 3 problems, we will not be able to spend the money wisely. So money is good, but it's not the only solution.
Just to follow up on that question, Claudia, you mentioned the 4 areas, and as like you said, the money is there, but now perhaps the hard part comes, both in terms of a mental shift within the German electorate, but as you said, the actual government apparatus. What does Germany need? Is there a lack of sort of professional, people that deal with strategic thinking in the government? And why one would think that made in Germany, Germany is the 4th largest exporter of weapons, very fine systems. Why does the government have an issue with getting the armed forces up to snuff, even now that the money is there? You seem to sort of describe a challenging path still ahead.
There are many issues. I just take out 2. The one is that so far, we had a 1-year planning horizon. So that means even if we think the budget would increase, you could only plan for 1 year. That makes it very difficult. Here, the special budget could actually help, because the special budget is exactly that, to give long-term financial planning security for big ticket items. So that could be one option. The other one is the procurement agency and the way you actually procure things. And here we would need an institutional reform of the main office, which has been tried in the past, but wasn't really successful. And here you could actually take a double approach. You could say, while we reform the big agency, we set up in parallel only for the projects to be financed by the special budget, only from this 100 billion special budget. You set up a special agency who takes care only for the projects from the special budget, like the F-35, the heavy transport helicopter or others. It's limited in time and in scope, and it's all what you want it to be: flexible, agile, modern, smaller. That would be an idea to actually cope with the kind of wrecked inter-blocking procurement system. So just 2 elements here.
And maybe just one last question before I also move over to Michal, Claudia. I mean, it's interesting, like you said, the money is there, and now we have, Germany has to look about reforming structures. But isn't it true also that the national security strategy plan is also not in place yet? So is it a little bit about, the horse and the cart sort of dynamic?
Yeah.
They need the plan perhaps before putting these structures and plans into place.
Indeed. I mean, Germany put into the coalition treaty, that's the government working plan last year, they put that Germany for the first time ever wants to write a national security strategy. And in pure theory, you would say, let's write the national security strategy. That's the roadmap to implement Zeitenwende. And once we know, normally a national security strategy is how we see the world, what are our instruments, our partners, and how do we allocate money to implement those things. That's the best approach you could do. This strategy will be ready at the end of the year or early next year. But we would actually like to spend the money already before. So at the first moment, that sounds like contradictory. Why we spend the money before we have the plan on how to spend it. On the other hand, other countries have been doing that. Great Britain has increased the defense spending before it published the integrated review. It worked. But what I find more important is that the 100 billion is not a number that has somehow fallen from the sky. And the 100 billion pretty much covers the money Germany would need to fulfill the promises it made to EU and NATO. So to a certain extent, it's not shopping money you can spend freely. it's already linked to certain big ticket items that are enormously important to finally do what Germany promised to you and NATO. And that's, for example, the very old debate about the nuclear capable aircraft in order to assure Germany's role in nuclear sharing arrangements in NATO. That's the F-35. It's the heavy transport helicopter, which is desperately needed. It's, for example, the future combat air system with France, which is also a long-term project. So to put it maybe a bit too simplistic, but the money is actually already more or less spent, not spent, but it's kind of earmarked, let's put it that way. And the other question is, of course, we have in Germany to think about what we need our armed forces for. But in the same time, I tend to think when we think about what Germany could do, what role it could play in European defense with all this money, the most natural role for me is to be the conventional backbone for deterrence and defense in Europe. This is a role Germany has been striving for since 2014 and NATO's strategic adaptation. It's to serve as a kind of backbone in which smaller and medium-sized countries can actually kind of lock in or kind of cooperate. And this is a kind of enabling function. So cooperating and enable our smaller and medium-sized neighbors. And that's also one of the reasons why it's so important that Germany spent this money wisely. It's an old leitmotif. If Germany is weak, European defense is weak. If Germany is strong and is doing its homework, it would enable other countries. Many countries decided to cooperate very closely with Germany. Hungary, for example. That means if we don't do our homework, we disenable others. If we do our homework, that could really make a difference for European defense, particularly if we were really to spend 75 billion a year. One last sentence is, it's not yet decided. That's part of the debate we are having in the moment in the parliament on what time frame the special budget is going to be spent. We think tankers debated this idea before the elections under a different name, under armed forces planning law, a little bit like the French loi de programmation militaire. And the idea was to say, we want to give planning security for big ticket items. The name special budget is less telling, but the idea is the same. So in order to make sense of that budget, you would need to run it over a long period of time to not only procure those things like the F-35, but also in order to assure the long-term maintenance cost and all that, so we don't run into the problems we had in the past where we didn't buy spare parts and didn't do the maintenance. So if we were to spend the money wisely, another criteria for success, we would need to make this special budget run longer than 4 years, as it's planned in the moment, but make it run over a long period of time. And here we'll stop.
Thank you, Claudia. Good to get sort of a broad picture of where Germany stands after this Zeitenwende announcement. And you gave us a good segue to go over to Michal, because Michal, I'd like you to put on 2 hats. First hat, maybe thinking about Europe writ large and NATO, as Claudia just mentioned. Germany could be sort of the backbone for security and deterrence on the continent. So maybe tell us your point of view when you think about the new European security architecture after this announcement, and then also think about your hat from in terms of your vantage point from Poland, from Warsaw, what the expectations are from Central and Eastern Europe.
Thank you very much, Sudha, and thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you, and it's always so much fun to be on the same panel and a discussion with Claudia. And we always have great conversations on a lot we agree, and so far we fully agree. And later on, I'm sure we'll find some good ways where our positions or thinking may differ a tiny bit. I think to answer your question, Sudha, I think the right place to start is actually the moment and for European security order and what's expected of Germany by all of us. And I know that everyone on the call is very aware of the war in Ukraine, but I can report, being close to it, that I think it's really cannot be overstated what a watershed moment it is for all of us in Europe. Not only for the Ukrainians, not only for the Poles, but for the Germans, the French, the Italians, the Americans, because they are also on this European security order vote. So, our security order will not be the same for a very, very long time. Even when this war ends to some extent, we'll be living with the consequences. And one of the consequences is that Poland is now on the front line. But this is also where the role of Germany is so critical. And of course, that's why the Chancellor gave a speech on February 27th, not on February 22nd. This is in response to the events, even though, as Claudia very much well explained, this 100 billion is to, well, you can put it nicely, to bring Germany to the level of promises that it made, or you can say, well, to actually fill all these holes that have been there for a long time of disinvestment. Being recently in Berlin, I learned that 20 billion alone will go to ammunition that has been understocked for a while. 20 billion for ammunition, and this is not because this ammunition has been sent to Ukraine. It's just it has not been kept up to date, right? So this is why it's happening now, and I think this is why it's so critical. And right now, the speech itself is a promise. It's a word that the Chancellor in Germany is giving both to its public, but also to the allies. So on the eve, or not on the eve, on the morning after the speech, there was a talk of the revolution in Germany. And that's, very true as long as this revolution gets implemented. So this is going to be key, that it's executed, as Claudia said, well, that there is something I keep hearing also in Berlin, that this is done in a sustainable way, that the public understands what is happening, why Germany needs to be spending the money on defense, and that's very much partially something that politicians need to be talking about. This is, I'm sure, partially what the German national security strategy will talk about. But this is not one-time thing. The world has changed for a long time, not for the next, not for the next 4 years. And let me just finish with very much endorsing the idea that Claudia put forward, and this is answering the problem number 3 of the problems, which is clear political guidance on what the German army should be about. And this is my Warsaw hat, that we very much think that it needs to be about the collective defense. And right now, we are still very reliant on the Americans. And thank God they are here. They stepped up very, very quickly. We now have 12,000 US troops on Polish soil. We'll have many, many more. But we are in the beginning also of transforming NATO. We'll have to move from a tripwire strategy to basically what the wonks called forward defense, which basically means we will have to have enough forces in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, all the way, actually starting in Finland, eventually, hopefully sometime soon, to defend against any possible attack, precisely because the lesson from Ukraine is that we cannot be fighting back in NATO territory. Look at what happened, what is happening on Ukrainian territory, how brutal this war is. And to do that, we'll need very real German forces and European forces, besides and on top of what Americans have, also remembering that the Americans will have to also be walking and chewing gum in the Asian theater. Let me stop here, but the context of, I think, both for Europe and from Polish perspective. Thanks.
So before I get to some of the questions in the chat, I just want to pick up a few pieces that Michal brought to the table and maybe ask both of you, because Michal mentioned it's, noteworthy that the speech that Scholz gave was after February 24th, but one can argue that, the speech was also for Germany's interest. Certainly, Ukraine was the impetus for this speech, but do you think, Claudia and Michal, that this speech and this investment that's been made this year can help Ukraine in the short term? Because I think that might have been some of the expectations after the speech. And unfortunately, regardless of the investment, Germany has been, after coming out blazing with the speech, it's been sort of stop and go over the past couple of months. Claudia, what do you think?
Zeitenwende is not only about defense. Zeitenwende is overall about German foreign security policy. And if you look at the speech, you have several elements that really show change, or where Germany Scholz in that speech, he said, we woke up in a different world. And the kind of short way of putting this is to say, if reality has changed so fundamentally, then we have to change our policies. And if I think about the Zeitenwende speech, I always have three key elements in it. The one is this before and after, what Michal called the new security order, what I would call we moving from a somehow peace order to a confrontational order. So we have a clear before and a clear after. It's disruptive change, not something Germany has chosen, but something that kind of really happened. And for me, the key element, it's about Germany. Germany did a lot more on security policy over the last years. So it went to the EFPs, the enhanced forward presence in the Baltic countries. It went to Mali together with France. And that was driven out of security considerations, but mainly out of solidarity with our allies. Germany didn't feel existentially threatened in Mali. It didn't feel existentially threatened in the Baltic countries. So it was mostly out of solidarity. And this war in Ukraine actually changed it. And for the first time, at least back then when the war started, Germany felt threatened. And there was this feeling, this is about us. This is somebody who is threatening our way of doing things, all the things we cherish, our political system, Europe, and all that. So it was perceived as a fundamental change. And for the first time, we have to act not because we want to be a good ally, but because we understand this is really about us. And if that's the case, you can throw overboard traditional policies. So it's not only defense, it was ending the unconditional energy relationship with Russia, and it was sending arms to Ukraine. Germany normally didn't, until the war started, Germany refused to send arms, and it refused to put Nord Stream 2 on the table. So you have several elements of Zeitenwende. It's energy, it's arms delivery, and it's defense. And that also means if we want to kind of tick the boxes, whereas Zeitenwende delivered, we have to look at all those various areas. What is important for me is that you can announce things in a speech. But if you want to fundamentally change German foreign policy, you need to change the mindset. You need to recognize that power politics are back, that Germany has a particular responsibility out of its size to play. And this is going to be, as Michal said, this is going to be a long-term change. It's not going to be over next year. We enter in a new security order where the opposite of peace, from war, is not longer peace, it's conflict. Even if the war stops in Ukraine, and I don't say it's solved, even if it only stopped, we will not live in peace. We will live in a permanent conflict with Russia, in brackets, and China, which will be carried out in the cyber domain, in the economic domain, in the political domain, and in the military domain. And you need to get the mindset. Michal, I remember we had so many debates about when will German defense policy change. And we always said there will be an evolutionary change that we had over the last year, or a revolutionary change because we have a big event, but we don't want to think about what that event could be. Now we have it. But if we want to make that change sustainable, it needs to be explained, it needs to be promoted. And this is where we need our partners. That our partners like Poland tells us, we like it that you spend more on defense. We are not afraid. We think it's a great thing to do. You could do more cooperative project with us, maybe, but in principle, it's great what you are doing. So encourage us. But that's for me, one of the biggest challenges, explaining this, the necessity of the change to make it sustainable.
Michal, just quickly on that, do you think there's confidence in Poland that this, as Claudia mentioned, can be sustainable? As you mentioned, can the revolution be implemented? Are there doubts that Scholz is faltering, or do you think that Warsaw is seeing that he will succeed?
Well, I would say this is not, the doubts are not only in Warsaw, right? The doubts are actually all around. And I know that there are German colleagues listening, and I know that the two of you know this very, very well. I wish we were convinced that the thinking has changed even in the core of the German government, in the Chancellery. And that right now, people are still very much yet to be convinced. So it's absolutely critical that this change permeates German government and German society, and that it is communicated, because I think that the picture outside is perhaps a little bit worse than what is happening on the inside. But this is also why I focus on the need for implementation. If Germany was to miss this boat, if Germany did not wake up with this biggest of alarms, it would be, truly not only lost opportunity in this sense that this is an opportunity to shift mindset, but it would create a very different dynamics. I'm just saying how this could go on. So to Claudia, to your point, absolutely that Poles and others will be encouraging Germany to spend. This is our big problem. Was weak Bundeswehr, and there is please take it from a Pole to everyone that is watching. There is no one worried about Germany becoming too big of a military power. I'm not saying that this will never happen, but this is just not the problem we are having right now, and we do need to figure out actually how we find good areas of cooperation as well on this. But yes, this is absolutely the moment for Germany to act across all these areas that have been put forward in the speech.
I'm going to go to the questions, Claudia and Michal, and I'm going to cherry pick a little bit and paraphrase and try to group some together. The first one is for both of you. Maybe we can quickly address that and then go to the questions on the F-35. The Belgian PM talked yesterday in Berlin about EU defense and integration. So this listener is asking, do you think it makes sense for Europe to sort of divide and conquer, in the sense that, the transferring the sea power to the Danes or to the Dutch, and another country should focus on land or air force along the lines of the Dutch-Belgian joint air force, and specialize this in the EU/NATO context? This is coming from an SPD foreign policy advisor. Claudia, do you want to go first, and then we'll head it over to Michal?
I think one of the big challenges is to spend all the money in a cooperative way. For those who can remember the financial and economic crisis in 2007, 2008, all European countries slaughtered their defense budget, but everybody was doing it on its own. And countries missed the opportunity to actually coordinate the defense cuts. The question is, will we be able to coordinate rising defense budget and make most of the money? And that's actually the old pooling and sharing and smart defense debate we had for years. So the idea is to say, for example, for the Baltic countries, you don't need an air force. NATO will do your air policing. So invest your money in other things. So as long as countries see a benefit in cooperating, Germany and the Netherlands integrated their land forces, for example, it makes sense that it needs to be coordinated, and it still needs to be driven by efficiency criteria. And I tend to think that cooperation works the best when the countries involved are interested in, and not if it's imposed by whatever other organization. So if countries decide to do so, then yes, perfect. But it should be coordinated in the institutions, EU and NATO, and it should make a clear economic and military benefit.
What do you think, Michal? Do you think European partners are ready to forego certain capabilities in the interest of pooling capabilities?
First of all, yes. When we have rising budget, this is a very good moment to cooperate and coordinate. Fully agree on this. There will be lots of challenges, but one of them is, of course, that military spending is about capabilities. That's one thing, but it also is very much about foreign policy and security ties. My own government buys only American right now, right? And this is, yes, Americans have very good stuff, but that's probably not only the only reason, right? And then there is the third piece, which is industrial base and cooperation. And you look at the French, I would say they care a little bit about their industry when they make their choices. So I think I think I'm not too optimistic on how far we'll be able to go. I fully agree that there is an opportunity for this. I'm not sure if we have the incentives lined up and the processes lined up to really do it, and also in a country like mine, and Poland is in a slightly different place perhaps than the Baltics, there is such a clear security threat and security perception that some of you might know. I mean, Poland is going up to 3% of GDP spending for defense. So any process that slows this down in terms of how fast we can get capabilities will not be welcomed. So that's another challenge. So I guess I'm a little bit skeptical.
Okay, so Claudia, I'm going to consolidate two questions for you on the F-35. So the decision of the F-35 has been made and did surprise some people, but I guess it's because there was an immediate need to fill a void. What does this mean for the future, or for the prospects for the future combat air system, and for cooperation with France in general, perhaps?
The decision for the F-35 was a decision for the only aircraft that is capable actually to do the nuclear role. The F-18, which was a previous announced decision, wasn't certified, and FCAS is a totally different story. So I think the decision for the F-35 was an important decision to show that Germany doesn't shy away from the nuclear sharing arrangements. If you listen to the speech of Scholz, it's very interesting with regard to procurement, because normally in Germany, if you want to buy something, you have to square the circle with three requirements. It has to be militarily efficient. It should, if possible, strengthen the European industrial base, in brackets France. And third, it should strengthen the transatlantic base, in brackets the US. Normally, you don't get all the three in the same project. So what Scholz did in a speech, he actually said, we want to buy the F-35, that's a transatlantic, and the US. We want to further develop the Eurofighter for electronic warfare, that's a European, and we want to continue the future combat air system with France. So we actually try to square the circle by announcing three decisions so that none of the three is actually having an advantage. And that's important to underline, because the French or France was listening to the F-35 decision and didn't listen so much, didn't hear so much the FCAS decision. What is important to kind of get the basics right is that the future combat air system is no direct competition to the F-35. The future combat air system, if it's going according to plan, will be ready in 2040, or even later, 2040. But we need a replacement for our aging Tornado for the nuclear role 2030. So actually playing the future combat air system against the F-35 is not correct. We need a nuclear capable DCA, the quickest possible, actually. Because the Tornado, we are the only one who's flying the Tornado. It's a museum kind of plane. So the future combat air system is offering a different role and will not be kicked away if Germany is buying the F-35. To put it in a different, slightly provocative way, if FCAS were to fail, it would not be due to the F-35. It would be due to all the problems this project has had since its inception in 2017. It didn't need the F-35 to be in trouble. The Future Combat Air System is as much a political project as it is a military project. It was launched mainly as a political project between France and Germany. Later on, Spain joined, in order to actually be the industrial dimension of European sovereignty. So to show we are not going to buy American, we are not going to include the Brits after Brexit. We are doing a truly European endeavor. So the political message is clear, but the implementation on the industrial and military domain has been difficult, to put it mildly, ever since. So it doesn't need the F-35 to be in trouble. But I hope it will still manage it, because just to finish on that one, if FCAS would not succeed, we would not only have a military problem, we would have a major political problem if the two main countries in Europe would not be able to find an agreement. And that's why it's so important the two countries, or the three with Spain, actually make a political effort to agree. If Germany and Spain were to drop out, or France were to drop out, France would still build it because they need it as a nuclear carrier. But the political message would be disastrous.
Michal, I saw that you wanted to come in here.
Just very, very quickly, that it was how excited we are that Germany decided to go ahead and with F-35s, and fully agree with everything what Claudia said. The alternative to making this decision was the real danger of Germany falling out from the NATO's nuclear sharing. And this is, to put it sort of in a, not in a sort of, in a very straightforward way, this would be it was a real possibility, because all the previous governments decided to kick the can down the road. It was coming really, really close in, also the coalition negotiations. And if Germany was to fall out from nuclear sharing, it would be a major blow to Germany's role in the alliance. And that's not something that is good for us, because we need Germany deeply embedded in the alliance. So that's why we are, thumbs up to buying F-35s and not worrying about nuclear sharing in Germany.
Michal, I'm going to stay with you for one more question from a listener and then go back to Claudia. There's one question about the US and future administrations, and could the US, is there the question of being an unreliable partner is still an elephant in the room here in Europe? And do you think this investment in Germany and what Claudia and you just talked about also being politically savvy when it comes to military decision-making in the future, is it enough to ward off a situation if the US were to become an unreliable partner? This sort of goes against the grain of our organization, but I'm going to give you the question anyway.
Thanks for that. No, and it is a question in quite a few parts of Europe, and it's a totally legitimate question. I would put it this way: the policy of current Biden's administration gives us time, basically, and hopefully we'll have 8 years of this time. But it is a time that nonetheless needs to be wisely used by us Europeans to step up for our own European defense. And over time, in Poland, we are betting a lot on Americans. And that's partially because they have delivered much better also in this conflict, in this war, and partially because there is no one else to bet on. There is no alternative if we are serious about the real threat, the real defense, and we are now, I think we are serious. Now, would someone like Donald Trump in 2024 go back and sort of try to undo what happened over the last 4 years? I don't know. I don't know if it's possible. I'm looking at bipartisan support for Ukraine, right? I'm looking at Congress that is bidding up Biden's request from 33 to 40 billion. So I'm hopeful, but am I blind to some other trends in American politics? No, I'm not. But I think 2024 will be differently, even if there is a change in the White House than if Biden didn't win the last election. And again, hopefully we have 8 years to put our house in order and let the Americans probably refocus eventually on Asia, but with a different place for Europeans in our own security and defense.
Thanks, Michael. We've got about 5 minutes left, and Claudia, I'm going to put 2 questions in the Q&A box together for you. There's one question on the Sondervermögen, this 100 billion euro investment, and if it were to be stretched over more than 4 years, the regular defense budget would have to be raised beyond what is currently foreseen to meet the 2%. How realistic do you think this is at the moment? And I think related to this question is who in the German public square is leading that change that needs to happen with public backing for security policy. What's your outlook on this front?
So the first is if we stretch the Sondervermögen.
Right, I guess the budget will have to be raised in real terms to meet the 2%.
Yeah. That's a bit of a kind of nerdy defense question, which I personally enjoy, but just to warn you. So the idea which we have currently in the budget plan, which is currently debated by the parliament, is not yet been adopted, is that the defense budget stays as it is now at 50 billion for the next 4 years. And in order to reach the 75 billion euros to spend the 2%, it would be taken from the 100 billion special budget for 4 years. So after 4 years, 100 billion would be spent. The problem there is, first, all the maintenance and all the things you need after 4 years would need to be spent from the normal budget. And that's not the idea of the special budget. The special budget idea is to have a long-term financial planning horizon. And the other problem is that after 4 years, you would need to increase your defense budget in your normal budget from roughly 50 billion to 75 in 1 year. And that means you have to justify why you are doing it. And I'm not sure the German public will change so quickly and be so pro-defense in 4 years. So the effect, if we were to spend the special budget in 4 years, it would contradict, at least to my reading, the initial idea of the special budget. Special budget is long-term procurement, security. And it would make, it's not easy to spend such a big amount of money in such a short time in a meaningful way. And it would make any increase of the defense budget in 4 years even more difficult. Why it is the idea to spend the 100 billion so quickly? Because it's not part of the debt brake. So you can somehow call it bonus money. Second question, who is leading the change? If you look now at the public debates in Germany, we have 2 ministers who are leading the debate. And from my opinion, they're leading it in a wonderful way. And that's our foreign minister and that's our economics minister, because they go out and they explain what is happening, why Germany has to change. They explain the various options Germany can take, and then they choose one and explain it. We have another Green politician, Toni Hofreiter, who put it in a very easy way. He said, if the reality changes, then of course we have to adapt our policies too. And maybe it's as easy as that, but you have to explain it. And if I see the 2 Green ministers, Annalena Baerbock as foreign minister and Robert Habeck as economics minister, they do a great job in not only defending what Germany is doing, but actively promoting and explaining. And Michal, if I take 1 more minute, Michal at the beginning said we have a new security order. I totally agree. We move from a peace order to a confrontational order. And in between those 2 orders, we are in the moment. And this is what I would call a security disorder. And in a security disorder, you need someone who tells you, this is where we are going. This is why we need to do this. And this is why it's the right way. And Robert Habeck and Annalena Baerbock are doing this in the moment. You could see when the economics minister Habeck, he went to Qatar to get a new energy relationship with a country which is not high on the foreign policy value-based foreign policy list. You could see almost, how much of a struggle it was. But he is perfectly explaining why he has to make hard choices. And this is so important. So the question is, who's leading the change? For me, in the moment, the Greens are leading the change, the two ministers. And if you look in the parliamentary room, we have a very committed chairwoman of the Defense Committee, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, who was a very important voice in the question of delivering heavy weapons. So there are voices who are leading and in which I trust actually to carry the change.
Well, I think I'm going to have to
be optimistic at the end,
Yes, exactly. And that's why I think I want to close it now before we get to other questions about, do we need to get conscription back and what's the apparatus for the national? I promise, hopefully we can have another discussion with Claudia and Michal again. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Claudia and Michal, for joining us, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Fingers crossed, Germany.
Thank you, Poland. Bye.